Well, welcome everybody to the New Ground Life and Leadership podcast, here to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus wherever you are and in whatever you're going through. Today, I'm really pleased to be speaking to Owen Hylton, who's the pastor of Beacon Church Brixton, formerly worked for 14 years in the civil service and is the author of the book, Crossing the Divide, which we have here, A Call to Diversity. As a black pastor living in London, Owen is familiar with the challenges of racial justice and the church, and in recent months has put together what he's called the Pathways of Peace, looking at how we can build a reconciled church. Those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about together in our time together. So Owen, welcome. Great to see you.
Yeah, hi Jez, it's great to be here. I hope you're doing well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for talking to me today. I'm really looking forward to getting into many of the things that I know you and I have spoken about briefly before in the past, and I've got so much to learn from you. You're a man of real wisdom, that's got a real wisdom gift. But we always kick things off really just by asking a question, an icebreaker. Tell us about what's one of the things that you've learned either about yourself or leadership in the past 6 months.
Okay, the past 6 months I've probably learned. I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of give two sides to the answer. One is I probably still carry in myself hurts and scars from racial injustice myself. I think that's probably come up again. And then the other thing I've probably learned is I may well have a part to play in helping others who really want to sort of press through and build churches that are truly kind of reconciled. I've probably got a part to play in helping them, and that is, when I say a lesson I've learned, that's probably something I've come to accept is part of my my future, part of my life. So I mean, there are loads of other lessons.
And it is that that tension and challenge that we find often in life, isn't it? That you are both, as you describe, someone who's walking with scars, but also realize you're equipped and able to help others who are hurting. In your book, Crossing the Divide, you wrote, I think, in 2009, you discuss issues of diversity, and you say in one of the chapters here that the issues of diversity are becoming increasingly popular or necessary to talk about for churches. You wrote that in 2009, based on what you saw going on in the church then. Now, obviously, over the past year, but particularly the past 9 months, really, that you would say never more so than now, we need to talk about racial justice and reconciliation in the church. You touched on it in your answer briefly. Do you want to just help us get under the skin of how you felt over the past 9 to 10 months?
I mean, when I mentioned that in my book, let's be honest, we were in a season of hope, because I actually finished the actual writing of my book at the end of 2008, and it was published in 2009. So I finished writing my book in the same month that Obama becomes president of the United States. So we're in a season of hope at that point, even though I was aware that, okay, I get we're in a season of hope, but I'm also aware this isn't, suddenly the world isn't going to become, great and wonderful all of a sudden. And I think in these intervening years, just to kind of give some context to the immediate answer, in these intervening years, the things that have kind of, I suppose, sprung up that have carried a little bit around the race issue would be in the UK Brexit. There was some underlying stuff around that. I think then when Trump becomes president, and then in the midst of the lockdown, the pandemic, George Floyd is murdered. But also probably in that period of time, 2008 to now, there was an increase in knife crime in our cities. And at the end, and in the middle of 2019, Ben Lindsay writes his book. And so there's a lot of things that have led us up to this point where George Floyd is murdered, and for me that has changed things. I'll be honest, it has changed things. It's highlighted the depth of an issue. It's also highlighted the need for the church to do a bit more soul searching in how it responds, partly because what we discovered off the back of George Floyd was our churches, many people in our churches were carrying pastoral wounds that we were unaware of. And it was only in post that they kind of began to come out. So,
Yeah, it was. I don't want to say fascinating, that's almost too mild a word, but to me as a white pastor, seeing the depth of feeling that George Floyd's death seemed to evoke in my black brothers and sisters was an eye-opener to me, and a real lesson, a journey that began for me, really. I live in a very white majority rural countryside small town, and so it's not something that I had been forced to give much attention to. You know, I think in your book, you rightly talk about the challenge and the privilege of building a multiracial, diverse church in London. Those challenges are still there in the suburbs, but they're just less obvious, and there's less urgency to engage with them, perhaps. Can you help us, people like me who live in towns like I do, to understand why you think it was that George Floyd's murder and the things that you've described, Brexit and Trump's election, made such a big impact on the black community? And yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing that has to be said, and to some degree just accepted, even though it's not always easy, is that growing up black or non-white in the UK is a different experience than growing up white in the UK, wherever you live. It's a different experience. It's partly because of you're in the minority, but it's also partly because of what that history has been over the years. So if we accept that it's a different experience, but for many, many black people, they've kind of been unable to articulate that fact. And every time you talk about it, people will think that, oh, maybe you've got some issues. Is that just your problem? You know, and I think that kind of gentle, polite pushback, was it really raised? Is it really a thing? After a while, I think people just stop talking about it, and they assimilate as best they can. Sometimes they even deny racism themselves, and they just get on with life. And I think what George Floyd did, and I actually think Ben Lindsay's book did this a year before, it began to give both permission and a language to be able to talk about these things. And George Floyd's death evoked an emotional reaction as much as anything. And people who never said boo to a goose before were now confronting their leaders and asking, what are you going to do about it? And I think those two things really evoked that. And then probably what we've also discovered is in a very light touch way, the UK is very diverse right across. So, you know, you've described yourself as living in this like little town, I suppose a seaside town, but you've got black people in your congregation. And I think that people have found that all across the country, you know, predominantly white, but there are black people here and there in congregations, and then this gave them permission to speak, and sometimes it was surprising what they were saying. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think in a sermon I saw of yours recently, you talk about the fact that the church isn't unique in being a diverse place. There are, you know, there's diversity in every club and organization you go to, but the church needs to be more than just an organizational community where people of different ethnicities and nationalities exist alongside one another. It needs to be more than that. And I think in your book, again, you talk about how churches became that almost unintentionally, accidentally. It's just what happened. We suddenly found ourselves, as the UK did, with people who are very different in churches together going, oh, wonderful, we're diverse. But we're not necessarily diverse until we recognize the distinctiveness and the differences and the life experiences that people bring with them. And I know that something Ben talks about in his book, talking about experiences of racism and what it's like being someone of a different skin color in the UK. can feel like an experience of second trauma over and over again, because you're having to talk about something that someone's not legitimizing for you and is denying, or like you said, is
Yeah,
accusing you of, oh, maybe just being another angry black man, if you, or
yeah,
you
yeah,
need to calm down, or maybe it's just your perspective, maybe you've got a chip on your shoulder. And so you
yeah,
have that every time you talk about experiences that are very personal to you, and yet you almost
yeah,
feel the need to keep talking about it because no one's listening. And so I can appreciate this real heartache and challenge in that. So I'm very grateful for your willingness to talk about it. Is that part of what you alluded to then in your opening answer, and you said you're both someone who is scarred but also realizing I've got to help other people who are scarred. So how
yeah,
are you processing many of your wounds, and maybe you could talk about some of those things in particular.
yeah. So, I mean, I think yes, I'm scarred. I'm reminded of, I suppose, hurts and pains and stuff. Um, I'm not only in helping other people who are scarred. I realise I also have a part to play in helping other people who don't understand.
Mm,
And so, even in that
very
process
good.
of helping them understand, I can get scarred again. I can be
Yes.
wounded again and stuff.
Yes.
But you kind of, I suppose metaphorically, I'm recognizing, oh, I'm a boxer, and getting hit is just part of what happens when you box.
Wow.
Um, and so that is part of it. So I think that, so if I really think about the deepest things that have pained me, it's not been somebody has said, Owen, you're this, or Owen, you're that. It is that sense of never quite being believed, never quite being understood,
Mm,
never people never quite accepting what you say. And you're right, it means that you feel like you've got to keep talking about it, and then people get the impression that, oh yeah, he's the guy that always talks about race and diversity. Whereas if you kind of knew me, you'd know, oh no, actually he's not the guy who always talks about race and diversity. Probably he's got other passions, but he's been forced into that because of circumstance and situation. So that probably gets me more than over, you know, racial slurs. I've preached and had people come up to me and said, oh, by the way, I'm racist, or I've had those kind of conversations, and those things don't they bother me less than somebody saying, oh, that probably just sounds like you've got problems, or do you need to sort that out, or is that just another opinion? Those things probably bother me more, um, from a
mm.
from a personal perspective, and I have that regularly. That's my regular experience. So, to this day, that's my regular experience.
How, as a boxer who's constantly getting hit, having to help other
Yeah,
people learn to box, how do you
yeah.
not just become really defensive, or hard-hearted towards people who don't see things as you see them? How do you keep open to listening to other people's points of view and perspective? Because I appreciate that it must be very hurtful to have to be on the receiving end of those sorts of comments all the time. And it's hard to distinguish between people who are just blind and people who are just naive and unaware. Like, oh, I
Yeah,
had
yeah,
no
yeah,
idea. I can't
yeah,
imagine that. Are you sure? Like, help me to understand
yeah,
that. How do you differentiate between the two
yeah,
responses? Because often that's what makes it harder for us to have these conversations, because I don't want you to hear me to be saying X, Y, or Z.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of challenges
yeah,
in just understanding each other. Perhaps you can speak into some of that.
yeah. I mean, I think personally, how I've done that, is, this isn't meant to sound overly spiritual, but I think that my own walk with God has developed quite deeply, and I bring a lot of that to Him. But also, um, I feel like He has given me grace to cope. And what I've realized is, grace to cope doesn't mean that I don't suffer, doesn't mean it's not hard, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it does mean I can stand up under it. I can live with it. And then He's also given me grace to speak. So I don't actually make a big differentiation between people who are ignorant, and people who might be arrogant and dismissive. No, I don't make a big differentiation. I'll kind of I'll try and show grace to both. And probably a few years ago, like even before I wrote my book, I had come to the conclusion that, it might sound odd, but that white people also have a place at the table of diversity. And that changed then how I then responded, because I'm like, okay, there is also a voice that has to come the other way, even if it might be naive, even if it might be arrogant. There's a journey that needs to be taken on. And that was quite a big thing, because I probably know a lot of Black people who probably don't think that, who probably think that, you know, maybe white people have given up their rights for a place there because of history and the way things have gone. But I came to that conclusion, and so that has meant I engage. And also I'm growing up in a movement that is predominantly white in the UK, even if it's, you know, we might talk about it, oh, it's not predominantly white around the world, but it is predominantly white in the UK and functions exactly like any other movement and organization here. And that's the one I've grown up in. So, you know.
Yeah, I want to come on to kind of hear more about your experience as a pastor in a predominantly white pastored movement. But I just want to come back to this idea of, and you didn't use this word, but it's the idea of white fragility, that we people of a paler skin color can become very defensive very quickly when someone tries to talk about their experience, because it can sound a lot like I, as a, you know, naive white person, is racist towards you or prejudiced against you, and that makes the conversation harder, all the more harder, because white people aren't able often to listen without becoming upset or defensive. And yet it's, you know, I know from talking to my Black friends, just the pressure and weight of expectation on a young Black man growing up to be perfect and to not put a foot wrong, not to be aggressive, not to fail at exams, not to do this, not to do that, because they feel the weight of representing an entire, you know, racial community in the way that I don't. No one, when I make a mistake, no one goes, oh, it's just an angry white man. They just think, oh, it's just, you know, he's just behaving badly. Whereas help me to understand some of the pressures that perhaps Black people, white people feel differently around those issues, and speak into white fragility if you want.
So I think it fundamentally, I think in the world in which we live, when we see say a white person slip up, make a mistake, or do something, our general response would go, oh, yeah, that's just Jez, maybe he was tired, you know, there were other pressures upon him, you know, blah 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 blah, and we will look at it as that individual. It was Jez, and I try and explain Jez. When a Black person messes up, makes a mistake, or whatever, I don't look at them as Owen. I look at them as being Black, and so they represent that to me. And particularly, I do that if what they've done is a negative. So if I've done something that's negative, I will be seen as a Black person. If I've done something that's really positive, I'll be seen as Owen. So you won't necessarily associate my positive actions with, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that, you know, Black people do those things. Yeah, but you might associate my negative action with being Black. And so as a Black person, you're having to navigate this world of, okay, I can't afford to do anything, you know. And so that's what, you know, in my book, I talk about, you know, when people say, oh, I don't see your color, I just see you. I'm like, oh no, but I am Black. And you kind of have to see that I'm Black in order that your thinking around Black people is affected by the positive things that you might see me do, rather than thinking that, oh, Black people are like this and Owen's different. So there is a bit of that. Now, also, when I've done things, when I was at my old church and we ran an event, it was in 2007, it was the 200th abolition of the slave trade. We ran an event to commemorate that. Nationally, the thing that saddened me in the church was we acknowledged the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade, and then we immediately went to talking about slavery today. And I was like, well, what happened to the 200 years in between? And so as a church, we did an event And I remember some of my white friends being annoyed with me. I suppose this would be what you're describing as white fragility, because the event made them feel bad. It wasn't that I had tried to make them feel bad. We were just presenting some stuff, but it made them feel bad. And so they got annoyed. And I was like, okay, because they didn't know what to do with the feelings. They were there
Yeah.
and they didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah,
So
I guess they're not used to having to live with those tensions in a way that I suppose a black person would be having on a regular basis, living to live with tensions of having to overlook unintentional slights of behavior or speech, overlook not being heard or fully represented. And it's interesting, because it's not obviously just in society, but in the media's portrayal of black people that they often are caricatured and stereotyped a lot more.
yeah,
It's changing. As a family, we're really into watching and listening to Hamilton, the musical. And that was fascinating to see American history retold with black actors. And
yes,
now I see the impact that's making on my boys who are white, the unintentionally the way that they are being shaped and changed to think more positively about people of a darker skin color, to the point that my son said to me the other day, Dad, my favorite president is George Washington. He's picturing that black guy from the musical. He knows nothing else. And I
yeah.
can see the kind of positive impact that makes, not just on my family, but particularly on young black kids growing up as well. How important do you think things like that are to see in every part of society, including church leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating. Hamilton is one example. The other most recent example of exactly what you've described was the film The Black Panther,
Yes.
which was an all-black cast, but it's a Marvel action movie. Yeah, I went to see that in Blackpool with my wife, and I think my daughter who lives there. I can't remember if she came with us, but we went to see it, and you literally came out of the movie, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if there were, and there was a guy behind me, a white guy behind me, and he made a comment which was clearly for me to overhear, but I'm not really great at those things, so I don't ever respond. I'm not friendly like that. But he made a comment about being the Black Panther rapidly becoming his favorite Marvel action hero. And I was like, gosh, imagine if more movies were made with this kind of positive image of black people, but not just as the hero, because the whole movie it was all black people, and to just normal black people were black, and the normal everyday people. And I thought, gosh, this would change the way people immediately begin to change the way people thought. And so important role models is massive. It's a massive thing for us. And I mean, to be honest, you see it in scripture, don't you? In Acts 6, you see when they have a problem, which fundamentally is an ethnic, racial problem between the Greek Jews and the Hebrew Jews. Who do they get to help solve the problem? Greeks. Or in Acts 13, when you look at the diverse leadership team in Antioch, it's very deliberate. Right at the beginning of the church, the leadership team of Antioch, the church that was the first place that they spoke to Greeks, is diverse. And so that kind of thing would really help. And he talks about it in his book. Ben Lindsay talks about seeing me on the stage at King's and recognizing, oh, okay, there's room for me here. And it's not that you want lots of tokenistic people, but you definitely need to work towards having a leadership that both reflects your congregation, let alone your context.
Yeah, I mean,
And
we often use that phrase of other things, but you celebrate what you want to reproduce, but you almost celebrate what you then want to emulate, and you create a positive culture. And I guess what's different, I hear you saying, is that I don't watch films with lead white actors and come out going, wow, I feel so empowered as a white man. But then that's because all things aren't equal. I live in a society where all role models, whether negative or positive, are often white people.
yeah.
Is that quite a sharp distinction, that perhaps why, as a white person, I don't appreciate the impact of, say, seeing a black preacher on the stage or a lead actor in a film that's being celebrated?
Yeah, massively. It comes down to this, that say, as a white pastor, you don't necessarily recognize, one, that it's different, and to the impact that that has on people, not just the black people, but also the white people. Yeah. So if you see so at New Day in, I think it's, I can't remember, it was 2019, we had it was one of Toppy's sons, a guy called TJ, who spoke. And it was a powerful, he was a great speaker and all of that. But what was powerful was, here's a guy that once upon a time sat on the carpet at New Day as a young person. And I think he was the second guy to emerge from the carpet to the stage to speak. And everybody loved him. Everyone loved him. You know, he was a positive role model for black and white people. I'm sure for black people, they felt empowered. And I think white people just loved having maybe a different kind of hero to have. And so, you know, he went and did a seminar later that week, and he just packed it out, and he could have said anything. Yeah, because he was so well loved, and he was brilliant. So it wasn't but that kind of role model. And if you think about an event like New Day, which had been running for 15, 20 years, never had that role model. But it had had hundreds and hundreds of black kids for years and years and years coming to it. That role model is massive. It makes a big difference.
Well, I'd love to come on to talk about perhaps why you think it takes so long, or it took so long in that instance. But perhaps just to hear some of your experiences as a black pastor in a majority white pastored movement. Could you share some of those?
Yeah, I mean, you'll know, the way I always describe this is I was at every Downs Bible Week and every Stoneleigh. And before the Downs, I went to the Dales. Yeah. So at that point, there ain't no black people in North Yorkshire. I'm telling you that much. And somehow my mum ends up taking us up to the Dales. I think it must have been 78. And then we come to the Downs. And I suppose I got used to the fact that there weren't many black people around. I wouldn't have realised or known some of the, maybe slights I was going through. I didn't really necessarily realise them. And then as I got older and wanting to be a pastor, I really did. And this was the only thing I knew. I didn't know any other kind of church and context and stuff. So I think that I probably experienced a lot of unintentional just rejection. I probably experienced a lot of, just even in terms of how I came into leadership. And there were times when I was in a leadership position, but I wasn't being supported by those who maybe were there to support me. And then I remember going through my experiences and trying to explain them, and them just not being believed. And that was, in a way, my book came out of that experience. I thought, I've got to somehow articulate what this is like, what is going on here, because I didn't realize the extent to which that othering was happening. I was, and not just me, but that other black people were experiencing. And I would be in church, and even when I was on the staff, it became apparent that when new people came to the church, if they were white, we all, within minutes, within days or weeks, we all knew who they were, and we'd all be connecting to them and everything. And if they were black, they could be there for years and we still didn't know their names. And I was like, wow, how does that kind of happen? And so that probably, I saw that, I experienced that, I found that difficult. I wanted to give up on church. And it was at that point of wanting to give up on church that I thought, oh, look, before I do, I should at least read the Bible and find out, what does the Bible say about this stuff, race and diversity, and so I did a study from Genesis through to Revelation, and just on those issues, looking from us being created in God's image, and then the promise to Abraham and all of that stuff. And I was shocked at the wealth. I was shocked at the depth of God's purpose and promise for this. I was shocked myself at it. And I knew at that point I couldn't give up trying to build a church that was genuinely what I now call reconciled. I knew I couldn't give up on that. And I knew then if God was purpose in that he would give me the grace for that. So I then, moving on, when I became a pastor myself, actually, whether or not this was right or wrong, I remember dumbing down talking about race and diversity, because I would only need to do it once in a year and people would think that's all I talked about. You could do it every week and they still wouldn't. They'd say, oh, what's Jez going on about? But for me, and I also realized that the reality of connecting with people, because it was a New Frontiers church in Brixton, the reality of connecting with people who came was a bit more tricky for me. That's what I realized. I didn't know it would be so. And I realized that if I were, now some people wouldn't necessarily think, oh, Owen, you're just making this up, this is you, and blah, blah, blah. But my experience now over like 10 years of doing it, and a little bit of the experience before I came, was, I think, so you as a white leader, someone could come to your church, like the average New Frontiers kind of person, they might come to your church, and within 2 weeks you could win them. And you particularly, because you're like one of the mean, uber friendly kind of people. Yeah. I probably wouldn't get as far with them in 2 years as to what you would get to in 2 weeks, in terms of their underlying commitment to me or whatever. And I discovered that was a reality, that I was a strong leadership developer when I was at King's. I became really weak at it when I first came to Beacon. And I think that was probably some of it. And I knew that because I once brought a friend to speak. He was another leader in New Frontiers. New couple were there. Had this guy been pastoring the church, this couple would have come back the following week. It was really obvious. They connected. And I did all the things you were meant to do to connect. I was having people around, all of that kind of stuff, and found it almost impossible to connect people who came from other New Frontiers churches who wanted to visit. Most people who connected to Beacon, the Beacon's quite a small church, connected in other ways. There were other ways that they found their way in. And so that was a challenge for me. And then probably I found that people were in and they were committed, but deep down, maybe they weren't fully committed. And if I made a mistake or something, that people could go quite quickly.
When you say people, are you largely talking about white, like connecting with people? Are you largely talking about the challenge of connecting with white people as opposed to black people? Yeah.
So connected white people, but also, interestingly enough, you'd have black people who would end up in obviously a lot of multicultural churches. Most multicultural churches are led by white people. And my whole point in my book, I make the point that a lot of black people being drawn to those churches for all sorts of reasons. And so then to be drawn to a church that you thought was fundamentally a white church and it was led by a black guy, then that was, for some black people, that wasn't what they wanted anyway. So so there was a definitely most visitors to Beacon over the years, I think, have been white. Most people who have looked in. And so that would be my own experience of it. Now that might, people might go, oh no, that's not true, you're bad at this, and I get all of that. There'll be some personal things in there, and if Pauline were on this call, she'd be like, oh, it wasn't like that, But just my own experience of it, looking back.
Yes, I really appreciate your honesty in talking about your experience of growing up in a church movement that's predominantly white and reaching that moment of thinking, maybe I should just give up on church. There's a couple of things you talked about there I'd love to just pick up on. Just firstly, I guess more briefly, talk to me about, you used the word othering there, which I know Ben covers in his book. That was a new concept to me. Perhaps you can help me understand what that means.
So I suppose when I talk about that, I'm talking about, it might be unintentional and invisible, being pushed to the side, being ignored, being, just rejected. And, Jez and Owen walk into a room and we're both greeted politely, but the warmth with which you're greeted is obviously different. Or, we've got a leader and they, you know, they come to both of us, and when they come to me, they're kind of high-fiving me, like, because that's what black people do. Hey. When they come to you, it's just a lot more warm and serious. It's more real. And so I would feel that, yeah. And I've had to do that. When I worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, I experienced that. You know, I had barristers high-fiving me. And you know, and so when I was in church, I'd realize, oh, okay, I'm not in that group. You know, that group seems to exist and people are socializing together. I thought I was part of that. Oh, clearly I'm not part of that. I didn't realize that. Wow. So othering can happen in many invisible, subtle ways, and you learn to live with it, or you just withdraw from situations where you might be othered.
Yeah, wow, that is fascinating, and particularly, you know, that comment about being high-fived by barristers, which I guess is largely the result of, like we talked earlier, really, of living in a culture where the stereotyped portrayal of a black man in the media is this. And so therefore, if you've grown up and you've not had many close friends who are different skin color to you, you immediately go, oh, that's how you talk to people who look differently. And I guess in a way we all learn how to relate to one another socially through our parents, through the media, whatever. And so the fault isn't necessarily always at the individual's fault who's doing it. They don't know they're doing it, but it perhaps emphasizes the importance of conversations like this that expose some of the unintentional othering, or ways that you go, why do we treat someone who's got a different skin color differently instinctively? And that's where I suppose having positive role models and experiences in the media really helps. You talked earlier about reaching that point of thinking maybe I should leave church, and you describe something in your book about, and you imagine an alien from another planet coming to visit and being told the gospel, thinking this is wonderful, and then spending some Sundays visiting churches and seeing the segregation in the churches. You've got a young church here, an old church there, a modern church there, a traditional church, a black church, white church, and the alien concluding this obviously isn't what you think it is. And as I read that, I thought, that isn't just a problem for an alien, it's a problem for me. Like the gospel is, as you rightly point out, that Christ came to destroy the dividing walls of hostility, and yet a cursory glance of YouTube and what gets said often by conservative Christians, or the comment that the Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week, certainly in American society. It's not just heartbreaking, it's deeply challenging to what we think we believe. Is the gospel working? Is it effective? Have we, help me understand, how did you process that and work through that? Because I find that like a source of pain and doubt, like, oh my goodness, maybe we have this ideal and we're never going to achieve it. Sorry, you go.
But I think that is partly right, that some people, if they're really honest, they don't think that what I'm calling the reconciled church, churches that are genuinely reconciled around race and gender, in terms of people feel that they belong, even when they're coming from awful kind of backgrounds. There are some people who don't believe that. They don't, and so they're not working towards that. They're cessationists when it comes to, what we would have called one new man, what I would call the reconciled church. That's not what it is. The other thing is that some people aim for something else and think that will come after. So, I remember a pastor in London going, oh yeah, we'll worry about diversity later. And I'm like, if you don't build that in from the beginning, you'll never build that in, because you'll set a culture of a church that will mean the only way I can be involved in this church would be to assimilate and become as like you as I possibly can, except for the color of my skin. I have to just become like you. I have to pray like you. I have to lead like you. I have to raise my kids like you in order to be involved with you. Otherwise, you're going to think, okay, no, we're not quite ready for that, or no one really knows him and stuff. And so I think that the kind of the issue is very real. What I became, though, was fully persuaded that the gospel doesn't say that. So I am fully persuaded, not just the gospel as in the bit about Jesus dying on the cross, But the gospel story, the Bible story, doesn't paint that picture. It paints a very different picture. And even the inclusion, this is in my head because I was preaching on Sunday on the story of Ruth. Even the inclusion of Ruth in this list, in this genealogy of Jesus, her being a Moabite, and I'm like, that's her story is Ephesians 2 in the Old Testament. Someone who was a foreigner, an alien on the outside, gets drawn in and now is a member of the family, part of the household of God. That's her story. And I'm like, okay, God, that's what you were doing all the time. And so I am fully persuaded that the gospel, I don't shake on that at all. The reality is that the church is not what we think it is. However good we think we are, our superficial acceptance of diversity is being exposed. And we've kind of got to be humble enough to acknowledge that and try and work out what to do. But because I'm persuaded that God hasn't intended that, and also I'm persuaded, oh God, you're able to do it. Even if we can't do it, you're able to do it. So I don't hold it as a pressure on myself, and I'm not depressed by it. The things that bother me are the things I've talked about before, but that bit doesn't. I'm fully persuaded in it. And my aim is to let people realize, no, this is a gospel thing. It's not a social justice thing. It's a gospel thing.
It seems it needs to be put alongside our battles against what we might call sins of the flesh, that we're very well aware of as Christians, that we talk about regularly. And yet when it comes to this one, we just kind of accept, oh, this is difficult. But it's not difficult. It's actually sinful to not pursue a kind of radical death to self that allows you to be rewired. And that's where I think I find it painful and challenging, is because I think I get it. I agree. It's in the heart of the gospel. But if that's the case, why do we not see more of it in reality? And I suppose that points to the power of sin and the way that it hides deeply in our hearts, to the point that we're more shaped by our cultures and our newspapers than we are by the word of God and the Spirit of God, and opening ourselves to the challenge of pastoral prophetic preaching.
Yeah, I definitely think that we are more shaped by our culture than we realize, and we don't realize the depth of the issue. So I wouldn't, if I were like a white leader, I wouldn't think twice about planting a church in an area with 8 of my friends who are all white. I wouldn't think to myself that that's a problem. I would think, oh no, we'll reach people. There would be a kind of an ignorant confidence that I would have that I can do this. The reality is I might reach people who come on a Sunday, but they never connect in. They never really connect into the church. And I would be used to that, because, white people are used to leading, and black people are used to being in context where white people lead. The other way round, you have to probably search the world to find the other way round, where black people lead in contexts that are majority white, but you won't find them. You literally will not find them. I would challenge anyone to show many situations where you have black people who are, leading in a context which is majority white of some scale. I'd challenge anyone, because we're not used to it. We don't see it in our workplaces. We don't expect to see it in the church. And so what happens then, and the challenge we have then, is when black people come through to leadership, the challenge is that people react to it, but they don't react to it directly. Nobody ever goes, I don't want a black leader. But they might go, oh, I'm not sure about this transition, and I'm not sure this is going on. And I know a guy who's having to go through that. He's coming through to lead, and then there was talk about, the white guy who was in charge saying, oh, should I just remain as a figurehead leader and you really lead? And because it's a difficult thing for white people to come to that place where they will accept a black leader in that kind of context. They'll accept a strong black leader in the context where there is a white leader, but where it's the black guy is the leader, I think that is a context that it's not talked about, never mentioned, but it doesn't happen very often in the church at all.
Wow. I'm so grateful for your comments. This is deeply provocative and very, very helpful. and isn't the sort of thing I've ever heard before. So I'm so grateful, which
Okay.
again probably just points to the challenge of the problem that we've got, that this is not something that we talk too much about. There's a quote that you shared in your book that I thought really stood out to me by John Forbes, who said, if you enjoy 75% of what's going on in your church isn't thoroughly integrated. To be content with less, we need to all learn to be content with less than total satisfaction. And do you think in part what you're talking about points to that reality? Not only are we consumeristic in our attitude towards church, but we want to have a high degree of fit and enjoyment of everything in church, and yet by the very nature of diversity, it requires us to be perhaps more mature, not only than we are, but than we're used to being, because our society doesn't encourage us to move towards maturity. It allows us to stay in infancy and just get what we want, like children. Talk to me a bit about that quote.
Yeah, so you're exactly right, that the experience that we have of church is not just shaped by our theology and our desire for mission, it's just shaped by our comfort and our own personal preferences. And so what happens, and so the thing to understand with that is, so when a Black person attends your church, they are already recognizing that that might not be true for them. Yeah, so they're already accepting, I may not enjoy the majority of what goes on here, but I'm hoping to enjoy enough that I can be here. And for most white people, that is fine. What happens though, that whole bit about 75%, is there often comes a tipping point where white people begin to feel uncomfortable with the nature of the diversity that they're experiencing. They begin to feel uncomfortable. And then what they do is they some of them will just leave, won't even be a thing, they'll just leave. Others of them will begin to speak up. Oh, is this church for all of us here? Is it really for me now? Why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? And so they'll begin to question and speak up. And also we end up creating a church culture which is really race-based or class-based, and we don't even realize that that's what we've done. And so one of the things that I talk about, but I don't talk about it in the book because it came as a phrase to me post the book, I think, is that where the cross and culture meet, culture must die. This idea that your culture is the very thing that the cross comes against, really, or not the cross, the fruit of the cross, a reconciled church, comes against your culture. Now, I've heard in the past, oh, culture is neutral. Culture's not, it's neither here or there. I'm like, no, culture is not neutral. Culture is real, and it's a barrier to people who want to join, who can't maybe meet your cultural norms and expectations. It's a real barrier to them. So how do I build a church? And then my argument goes, but that is exactly what happened to the Jews. The Jewish church, it was cultural distinctives that were being undermined by the gospel, wasn't it? The food laws, I can't come into your house, circumcision. These were cultural things that meant that they were distinctive from other people. And the gospel challenged that. That's what the gospel challenged, and I think it challenged it there. It must challenge it now. And so so I think that now you can have those kinds of churches even when you might have a majority Black congregation. You can have churches that are at their core of it, they're still white, and people are still holding on to those things. And what normally happens is the white people gravitate to wherever they feel most comfortable in the church, and the church could be overrun by Black people, but the white people will find themselves in a place.
Wow. As you're talking, I'm thinking about a friend of mine who planted a church in the Middle East, talk to me about some of the cultural challenges that he faced as an Englishman, just trying to understand Middle Eastern culture. And I remember thinking at the time, as much as I love the idea, I could never do that. Turns out my Englishness is far too deeply ingrained. It would be too painful. And he even said, once you're over 30, it becomes so much harder for you to adapt to another culture, health or like easily. But as you're speaking, I'm realizing, oh, I have to do that here. Like it's not just if I went to the Middle East, I'd really have to die to my English ways. And it's not even about Englishness. It's just the way I was brought up, my family's culture, which is where, what we mean by culture, the primary influence on us is going to be our mum and dad or not, or, whatever background we come from. And that's just it sounds simple, but for me, that's just become quite a profound realization as you're talking. I was wrong to say I could not do that, and therefore I'll avoid the Middle East and planting churches in cross-cultural settings, where actually we've all got to wake up to the fact that that's what's going on in our churches every week, and people are having to go through that process, whether we realize it or not. What we need to do is to wake up to the fact that we as pastors and as those in the majority culture need to also go through that process of death and personal reevaluation of our own culture and attitudes.
This will sound in our context, so forgive me if this will upset people, because I don't mean to upset people deliberately. But what you're saying there is interesting, and I understand the way we operate missionally in our movement. But I think personally, the very least we should be doing is evaluating how we do mission. Because the truth is, if I learn to die to myself and my culture living in London, I can reach the world. Yeah. And I don't need to go to the world. But probably within 2 miles of where I meet, there will be 100 different cultures, 100 different nationalities. If I could learn to reach those people, many of those people, the truth is, they want to go home. Yeah, they're not everyone who's come from abroad has come to England because they want to stay and live forever. Some of them want to go home. Imagine if we found a way of setting up a process or a program that trained people to go home to plant churches. And when I was in my previous church, a guy came up to me after, I can't remember if I'd spoken, he came up to me and he was from Ghana, and he said, I want to plant a church like this back home. Yeah. And what he meant by that wasn't that he wanted a church that was white and black, but some of the way the way the church was, the grace that he experienced there, the breaking down of walls. For him, it would be tribal. For us, it might have been more ethnic, cultural, or racial. He wanted to do that back in his own his hometown. And actually, the little group, Emerging Sphere, I'm part of now, interestingly enough, they've sent people who are going home to their hometowns to plant churches. And I personally think that's what we should be doing. We should be reaching people because we've been given the opportunity to reach people from right across the world, which not everyone has, and we send them home and they plant churches. And I just think that for me is a no-brainer. Now we're not yet doing it, and even I'm not yet doing it, but I still think that would be how I would want to do this. Now I'm not saying that people can't go and all of that, but I think, man, imagine if you could send someone from a Syrian back to Syria who understood grace, who understand some of these things. Imagine if that happened. And then you supported them, you trained them, you helped them, well, you gave everything to them.
And I think it's this that makes the church the hope of the world, because we have a Godhead who is diverse. And if the church grasped the power and significance of that, then you'd send that man back to Assyria to plant his church, but he wouldn't be planting an Assyrian church. He'd be planting a Christian church that is trying to represent and reflect the Godhead in its embracing of diversity. And that's where, if we start to think of diversity as tokenistic, we've got it completely wrong, because as you rightly said, it's in the very fabric of who we are as a people. That's what makes us different from, say, Islam, that has a God on its own, who wants to create everything that looks, monolithic and the same. Islam's practice the same the globe over. Christianity looks wildly different the globe over, because God is different in that sense. He's not only incarnational, but he's diverse. Well, just as we're kind of drawing to a close a little bit, I'd love to hear a bit more about what you're doing now in Brixton, your pathways to peace and your emphasis on the Reconciled Church, some practical tips. I've seen on your website you've got some really helpful PDFs that people can download. And by the way, all links to where they can buy your book and download the material will be in the show notes to this episode, so people can go there if they want to find out more. But tell us a bit more about Pathways to Peace and the Reconciled Church.
Yeah. So again, it was really off the back of George Floyd. I concluded, I suppose, I've just got to go for this. I've got to go for this. And I suppose I came and I responded initially by just writing a piece, just saying this is my own response to what's going on. I then got such feedback from that I thought, well, okay, how do I then help people? And I'm always in my response trying to be, I suppose, biblical. I'm not just coming up with ideas. So when we talk about a pathway to peace, in my mind there is Ephesians 2, the cross. He broke down the walls, he removed the hostility, thus bringing peace. And that peace is not just peace between me and God, it's peace between me and you. And so although it comes out with a process towards peace of engagement, education, I think it's empathy and encouragement, and there's this engagement towards peace. There's a recognition that peace is won at the cross, but I need to kind of draw it from there. I can't think of it as this ethereal peace in the air. It's one at the cross. And so that was there to really help. I think the Reconciled Church, through, I suppose, lots of conversations with different people, you and others, I'm just gathering a group of people who I know in their own context are really trying to look at this. How do we do this? How do we do this better? How do we learn? How do we become equipped to lead churches better, understand our congregations better, and in our own context? And so, we're gathering this group together just from different, I suppose, spheres within New Frontiers. We're all New Frontiers churches. People who, I suppose, to some degree have either reached out to me or reached out to Angela Kemp particularly. We're wanting to do that and help. So that's kind of what we're doing. I mean, locally, we're just building the church, as it were, and we're working not just on issues around race, but also
someone whose authenticity is genuine. Sorry, I've got computer problems going on here.
No, it's fine.
Sorry, carry on. Music playing in my ear. I got very confused.
So just like in summary, I think that the Pathway to Peace, the Reconciled Church, I'm definitely working on that. I'm working on that locally. We've kind of come up with a number of steps towards the Reconciled Church. We are preaching on each of them in our church at the moment. So that's like, I think in the end, it'll be 13 weeks that we've preached. We've got videos of race conversations that we've been showing every week. And so in a local context, we're doing that. And we're also recognizing that the Reconciled Church is not purely about race. It's also, it has an impact around gender. It has an impact around, I suppose, poverty. It's recognizing that these people are different, their experiences are different, but the gospel that you preach to them can be impactful. It's Isaiah 61. It's good news to the poor. The gospel binds up the brokenhearted. It sets the captive free. And so we're kind of really going for those things, and locally, and I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot around the race thing, but if I'm honest, I'm learning masses around the gender thing, partly through my relationship with Emma Gould. I'm learning loads around that. In a way, historically, I might not have engaged. Now I'm realizing I have to engage. Because the Bible says that elders direct the affairs of the church well. In order to do that, I must understand my congregation, and I must understand my context. Otherwise, I can't do that. So I'm feeling those things quite strongly within me.
Wow. Oh, I'm so grateful for our time together. There is a need for elders to lead courageously, and I think often we haven't had conversations like this because either we've been afraid of offending, or we've been afraid that we're going to have to like you mentioned the gender one there, talking to Emma. Often we haven't engaged with the conversations and the experiences of women in our churches well enough because we're afraid, oh, they're going to want to dismantle, compliment the Bible's teaching on male only eldership. Oh, so we won't engage with it. Whereas that's a very fearful, defensive approach to someone's story and experience. And I guess the call, not just in the conversation about racial diversity, but in any form of diversity and leadership in the church, is a call towards courage and conversations where we're willing to listen, unafraid to other people's experience and legitimize what they've gone through. So your steps: engage, educate, empathize, and encourage. Really helpful. And as you mentioned, there is plenty of resources available on your website, which again we'll post a link to so people can download. Owen, as we draw to a close, is there anything else that's kind of just bubbling in your head that you'd love to just leave us with as we finish?
I think just the encouragement for people to push the boundaries. I don't think there's anything in the scriptures where progress was made without a boundary or a tradition being pushed. If I go back to the story of Ruth and Boaz, the reality was Ruth should never have been on the threshing floor. That was the wrong place for Ruth to be. Yet that was the place that it was almost like in God's grand purpose, Ruth was meant to be, in order that God's purpose could be fulfilled in her life, and through the life of Boaz. And sometimes we have to push against, not fight. I'm not necessarily asking us to fight, but push against what we think of as norms. And what you just mentioned there is really interesting about fear. One of the reasons we don't do these things is fear. And another reason is we're trying to preserve sound doctrine or whatever it is. And I'm like, there's a danger that we preserve sound doctrine to the point where sound doctrine isn't sound doctrine anymore. And we're trying to preserve something that isn't really there. And we have to engage with a world that has changed. And I could go on about that for ages, but the world has changed, and we have to engage with it as is. I see it very clearly in New Day, but I also see it very clearly in my own context, that if I preach the gospel in the same way I did 20 years ago, it's not just that fewer and fewer people will be saved, it would just become more and more irrelevant. Not because Jesus didn't die on the cross, but because the world that we live in today requires us to think slightly differently about how we present the gospel. And so that's I'm living with that, I suppose.
That's brilliant. And perhaps that's a conversation for another day. We can get you to come back and talk to us about presenting the gospel that answers today's questions, which would, which would make sure we're not just getting you to talk about issues of race.
So they're definitely race is obviously one of the things, but it's not the only thing that I think about and build and stuff.
Owen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been humbling, it's been challenging, it's been a huge privilege, and I'm so grateful for your willingness to share your experience, to not just get punched, but to teach other people how to box better, and the vision that you're running with of the Reconciled Church. I think it's beautiful, and it's what we've got saved into. It's what makes the gospel so glorious. So thank you for championing that and running with that. And I look forward to seeing what happens next.